Hello, friends. Welcome back to Beyond the Deal, where we get real about business, entrepreneurship, and commercial real estate. I'm Lacey Labs, here with my co-host Laura Martin. In this episode, we're joined by Jolie Hodge, president of Classical Academic Press. Jolie shares her background as a classical teacher and as one of the founders of Classical Academic Press. She also educates us on what classical education is, what its distinctives are from other approaches and curriculums, and how classical education is shifting across the country and globally. In this episode, you'll hear Jolie's perspective on why classical education is sometimes perceived as being more rigorous, the support that their company offers to schools, teachers, and home educators, and the advice that she would give to someone looking to get started in classical education. Jolie Hodge, welcome to Beyond the Deal. It's great to have you with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting. Us.
Yeah, we're excited to have you.
Thank you.
Let's just start by hearing a little bit about your background and your story and how you landed in classic academia.
That's it's a fun, circuitous question and answer. So you might need to cut some of this out. But anyway, so I grew up in Saudi Arabia.
You did?
And I did.
I didn't know that.
I did. My dad was a civilian engineer with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and we moved to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia when I was a very little girl.
Wow.
And there was a sort of like an outpost school that had been set up there for families that were living there from abroad. We weren't allowed to go to the Arabic schools that were there. That was for Saudi families only. So this school had been planted maybe several decades before, maybe in the 50s or 60s. I'm not exactly sure. But the way that they had set up that education at that school was the way that the English had been educating in their country at that time. Okay. And then it was like the land that time forgot. Nobody came and started to give improvements or change the pedagogical approach or anything like that to the way that the kids are educated at that school. I don't know what it's been like since we moved back, but when I was there in the early 80s, it really hadn't changed all that much. So I didn't realize it at the time, but I was getting an education that was very similar to the kind of education that we would call classical education today. Again, just because that was what had been set, and then they really didn't mess with it a whole lot. So sort of fast forward to, I come back to the United States and I go through, just finish out high school and go to college and so forth, really not appreciating what I had or what it might have been or being all really distinctive. I mean, I knew it was a little bit different, but not in ways that I could really articulate as such. Yeah. And then I ended up coming to Covenant Christian Academy, where Chris Perrin was the headmaster, and I was interviewing for the position and learning a little bit more about classical education. And it was then that I started to put together the similarities between, this is more like what I had when I was little than what I got when I was back in the United States. And it started to kind of click for me a little bit about what that sort of looked like. Certainly they weren't purists about it, and they were getting a lot of teachers who were, modern teachers for the time and that kind of thing. And so there was probably some delusion. And to be fair, I mean, they didn't teach Latin, they taught Arabic. So that was one big difference. But the way that we were being taught and some of the different approaches and the methods and things that were being used were very similar. So as I continued to work with Chris, over the first couple of years that we were there, he came to me, and Chris has a few, if anybody knows him, and I know a couple of you do, he has a lot of ideas, great ideas. And he came to me one day and said to me and another teacher there, would you be interested in starting a publishing company? And I was in my 20s and no kids and married, and I was like, sure, sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. And there we did. We started it. Chris and the other teacher, they co-authored the Latin text, and that other teacher and I co-authored the logic text. And those were our first lines that we published. We published Latin for Children A, and we published The Art of Argument, and the publishing company was born. And soon after that, Greg Lowe, who you've had on the show, came on board, and things just kind of kept growing. I always like to just note that I'm not an owner of the company anymore. I was one of the founding owners, but I'm not an owner anymore. And I sold my part of the company back in the early 2000s, 2008, but have continued to stay on with the organization for the last many years.
You're one of the founders.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated about Saudi Arabia. How long did you live there?
Let's see. It was just, 6 or so years from the 1981, I want to say, to 1987 or 1988. I can't quite remember exactly when we moved back. But yeah, it was. We lived on a military compound. We lived between two of them. Very original. We lived on B2, and then we lived on O3, American government. Really creative names for things. But yeah, we went to that international school. We attended an underground church while we were there. Very discreet.
So an underground church in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, we went to. It was off of the compound. We would need to go to a family, very brave family that would be willing to open up their home and invite people from all over to come and worship and it was. It wasn't just Americans. There are a lot of faithful followers of Christ living in some of these places where Christianity is forbidden, and Saudi Arabia is one of those countries. And they risk quite a bit to get to those locations and to worship together. And it's a little bit scrappy, it's somebody's living room. It's not always an ordained minister that's doing the teaching. There's, especially in a country like Saudi where there's no alcohol technically permitted, it's not wine and, it's going to be some sort of juice that gets passed around. And, but it's the, not forsaking the gathering together, and fellowship together and that kind of thing.
Can you speak Arabic?
I can count to 10. I can greet you warmly, and I can tell you have no brains. Those are the...
I would think it'd be hard to learn. Yeah.
It was. And this is something with it, we had to take Arabic classes. That was part of the arrangement to have this international school. One of the requirements was that they had to teach Arabic. And so we had teachers come in to teach. But this is so true of so many things that were taught. The homeroom teacher would leave the room when the Arabic teacher would come in. So the adult wasn't learning Arabic. The children were. My parents weren't learning Arabic, but my brother and I were. And of course, it wasn't being spoken at home. The teachers weren't re-emphasizing it. Okay. And so,
which is important.
What happens when you walk away? If nobody else around you owns that skill, it evaporates.
You could be at a party and they have you write down something that someone wouldn't know about you, and that would be it.
Like the 2 truths and a lie.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that would be fun.
All right.
Yeah. Every once in a while, I'll impress a Uber driver with a greeting, or something.
Yeah.
And they'll kind of look at me surprised that I can say hello and how are you?
How do you say that?
Marhaba.
Marhaba.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
very
super
cool.
neat.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Very neat. So you were a founding member of this publishing company, which has flourished and is quite large now compared to the small beginnings.
It was. It started off very small. You've heard some of the stories. It really blossomed and grew after I sold my part of the company. So I don't know what that kind of says about my involvement. But yeah, it's been a lot of hard work. You've heard that Eugene Peterson quote, probably a long obedience in the same direction. And this has been some faithful people who have committed to doing this work between Chris and Greg. And there were other owners too. Aaron Larson was one of the founding owners, but Rob Badworth has been an owner. He's not an owner any longer. And then we have a third owner right now. So it's Chris and Greg and a gentleman named Michael Baleka, who is... he owns a collection of a little network of classic charter schools down in Florida, but really fantastic strategic partner and another great ally in the work in classical ed. But it's a lot of people who have just been working faithfully and tirelessly for a lot of years. We're next year, 2026, will be our 25th year in operation. Wow. So the country celebrates 250. And we're a 10th of that. So
25 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I've learned quite a bit from working with Chris and Greg over the years. They've been very generous with their knowledge and resources and time, and also with lots of great opportunities over the years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what are the different roles you've played in this company from its founding? You've been there all this time, right?
Yeah. Off and on a little bit there when we adopted our daughter.
Okay, yeah.
I took a little bit of a break, but so hats that I've worn. Founding owner, author, maybe a little bit of a content editor on some projects. I sat as the director of ClassicalU Academy, which is our online. We call it K-12, but it's more like 3rd or 4th grade through 12th grade. We don't have the kids in front of a computer for K1 and 2, 3, all that much. But the director of ClassicalU Academy, so really kind of helping to find great teachers that we could hire as contractors for them to offer classes, and so just kind of running that business. And then they invited me right when COVID, so 2020, I became the vice president of operations, sales, and marketing. And then in 2024, they offered me the role of president.
Wow. So,
it's been a few different roles over the years, but but it's been small. So they've been, they've all been very formative roles.
You have a big position right now.
I mean,
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's never a dull moment.
Yeah.
But it's the role is, the company is getting bigger. The needs are there are more needs. But what really matters is having a great team and great leadership, with the owners of the company being what they are, and having a good strategic plan, good communication. But the team really makes all the difference. I mean, we've really got a great team.
So I've worked with you guys when you've moved several times, and the space we're in, you guys used to be in on Market Street, overlooking the creek, Dr. Berber's building.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, you guys were there, and then you were in the radio station.
That's right.
You just moved.
That's right.
And grew your square footage exponentially.
Yeah.
For your team.
Yeah, I keep forgetting about all the places. There have been a couple of sketchy ones.
I wasn't involved in those.
No. But the organization's needs have changed. Certainly, just more people, but then also different kinds. It's just been since maybe 2020 that we've had a sales staff. Well, sales staff, they need closed doors so that they can, be on the phone. But that wasn't necessarily something that we had to think about back when we didn't have a sales team that was reaching out to schools and, trying to build relationships and that kind of thing. We have a dedicated marketing team. We have web developers, systems, data and systems, inventory management, reprints. We have a production department with editors and designers who collaborate with authors. We have finance and operations roles. So it's this little, it's this little cosmic place that has everything that a company would have, everything from accounting and HR and finance to the specialty things that we do. That would be in this particular industry.
But since COVID, I would think the business has taken off.
Yeah, it did. What happened, there were a few things that happened with COVID. One of which is that, people were kind of pushed into homeschooling. And so families that had never thought about how am I going to do this had to think about, how are we going to do this? So, so homeschooling got a big hit, big bump. And that was, and some of those eyeballs came our way. But then also private schools that responded a little bit differently than some of the public schools did. Those private schools had the benefit of some of those families coming in their direction as well. And that meant that, they needed additional curriculum and that kind of thing. So, some families choosing private education instead came our way. But then I think also there was just some additional eyeballs because, even when the schools were up and running, families got to see what classes were like, what they were, what those classes included, what questions were being asked, what was being required of their kids, that kind of thing. And some parents made some decisions based off of what they sort of saw going on in the classrooms that I want something different for my family. So, I think it's been good overall if you're a fan of school choice, if you're a fan of, parents having opportunities to make specific decisions for your child, then, some of those outcomes people would say would be a good thing. For people who are, don't think that those are great outcomes, then it probably looks like we've regressed in some way. So it's really kind of depending on which vantage point you're looking from.
Well, we're both fans of classical because both of our kids have gone through Covenant Christian locally.
Yeah, it's a great place.
And I've seen both sides, public and the classical private. Mm-hmm. And it's such a difference where like you can go in anytime, you're the parent. I just... when they were considering moving their son there, I was a big fan of. Oh, good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's a great step there.
Yeah.
So for any of our listeners who might not know, because I'm assuming there's probably going to be some who are like, what is classical education? What is this thing? So what does this mean? What is classical education? What makes it different? How does it stand out? What are some of the distinctives? To someone, just pretend there's someone asking who just doesn't know, and you're going to share with them what is classical education?
That's a good question, and I was thinking that there are teams of people who are trying to boil this down into like how would you define what it is, because it feels like it's kind of a big answer. But I thought of two things to say. The first is the word classical sometimes throws people off a little bit, so I'll start with that. And I heard this analogy, and I can't remember where I heard it, but I wasn't the one who thought of this. I'm old enough to remember when Coca-Cola decided to change its recipe, right? And so there was Coke, and then they went to New Coke, right? And then it wasn't received well. People weren't fans, right? And so what did they do when they wanted to go back to that original formula? They didn't call it original Coke; they called it classic Coke, right? And they went back to, and so now if you look at any Coke can or bottle, you see it's classic Coca-Cola, right? Mm-hmm. That's a little bit of how the word classical is used. We're going back to something, the way that people were educated before the sort of the progressive model of education had sort of taken root. Mm-hmm. And so if you can think about it that way, we're trying to recover something. We're trying to go back to more of that original recipe of what education was. And so that's sort of the word that has gotten associated with it. Other people might refer to it as liberal arts education, or some people refer to it as the education of the church. But that might even be too narrowing. I like liberal arts education. Classical education is okay. But it's really this idea of going back and recovering something. So what is it that we're going back and recovering? That's the kind of the question that I think everybody sort of wants the answer to. So if you ask folks, I think if you ask them, what is the purpose of education? It could be, well, I want my child to get into a great college. I want them to be able to get a good job. I want them to be able to earn a living well, or I want them to be a good citizen and have a good impact in society. Yeah. Those are all good things, and education is for that, but not just that. And I think sometimes we're a little bit too easily satisfied with some of those very sort of practical answers. Mm-hmm. I think what classical education tries to do is say, okay, let's take a few steps back even beyond that and ask, well, in what ways can we get your child there? And it's really about cultivating a life of wisdom and virtue by studying what is true and good and beautiful and holy. Those are the things that would really set up your child as they grow up to be able to be excellent in whatever vocation they choose. So we would say that education isn't necessarily for a vocational end of a particular kind, but it's really about becoming a well-formed human being so that you can operate in this world and whatever your calling is with wisdom and with virtue. So we try to hold up exemplars of what is true, what is good, what is beautiful, and teach towards those things so that students are able to identify what those things are. And that's not necessarily specific to just the Greeks or the Romans. You can find examples of that in Eastern traditions and, Russian literature and, African traditions and so forth. But identifying what do we mean by what is true? What do we mean by what is good? What do we mean by what is beautiful? Those are things that are sort of transcendent. They transcend culture, they transcend time. And teaching students about how to, we use education to teach those things in a way to help form them well in wisdom and virtue. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's through history, arts.
All of the regular subjects that you would teach to anybody, you would teach mathematics and sciences and history and literature and arts. And so, all of the subjects give you an opportunity to explore what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. So it's not necessarily changing what's taught. It's probably changing the orientation so that your child is learning those things, but not just those things, so that they are becoming a well-formed human being in the process. Somebody who you would look at them and say, that person has good character. There's excellence in that person as part of how they're being formed as a human being.
Yeah, I love that answer. It's interesting, like thinking about it now, I'm like, okay, there's some things I would have assumed that we didn't even put in how you described it, and they would be maybe natural consequences of or part of the process. But it seems like you've gotten backwards to a really core definition of what it means. And it's really about forming people.
Yeah.
Right? It's about forming people with.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
People. And, the way that classical education, I think some of the things that, when a family comes to a new school and maybe they're looking at a school, some of the ways that you kind of try to show, well, how do we teach? They might have students sing, songs, chants. They might have them recite different things. You might have them, show, memorize different pieces of information. And all of that can be twofold. One, it's showing that these are the methods that might be used to help students learn that information. But, those are also, when a student memorizes something that's, whether it's the Gettysburg Address or something else, the student had to demonstrate some student virtues, whether it's discipline or tenacity or, patience. They have to form themselves in these character traits, these virtues that are going to go on to be to their benefit, even if someday having memorized the Gettysburg Address or the opening of the Declaration of Independence is no longer what's required on a test. That's not really the point. The point is that they matured themselves, that they grew themselves in these ways so that they could do those things. I heard it said just the other day that, very often we think of, students might think that the products that are produced at a school are the essays or the projects or the test grades and that kind of thing. Those are just the means to producing the student that we want, right? What we're producing in education is students. Education shapes who they are. It shapes what they love. It shapes who they're going to be. And so education should be about producing a student who is well-formed. It's really not the essays that the teacher is looking for. It's how are you thinking? How are you reasoning? How are you expressing yourself?
Not do you agree with what I think, but can you think this out and articulate it yourself?
Yeah. And I think my girls are fantastic readers, writers, public speaking. I mean, they may not have liked all that, but it's lessons that are going to serve them well their entire life.
Sure.
And I always found that even when they were little, because they started there in kindergarten at Covenant, they just pushed them to do things I would have thought were well beyond their age or years. If I had homeschooled them, I would have never even attempted a lot of that stuff. So that was always very impressive to me. And just some of the neat things like the Forum Agora, where they're, they can write 10 words on their hand or on an index card, and that's it. And they got to give a 10-minute speech, and it was so impressive. I mean, I loved it. I thought it was a great experience.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, I think we both are probably a little bit thinking through the lens of our experiences as parents. And that's one specific school. So looking at classical education from a wider lens than just Covenant, which is a great school, and we have a lot of great memories from it and experiences and things our kids have learned or are learning. Is it normal in the wider lens for classical schools to be considered more academically challenging in school settings? Because that's something I've noticed here, at my child's, fourth grade level, like talking to their parents. Covenant is considered probably the top, if not one of the top, if not the top academic school in Central PA, like to send your kid to. So I'm curious, does that carry out across other systems?
There's probably, I don't know if so I'll say it this way. I think that classical schools very often are associated with being rigorous in some ways, in part because it's different than the way that than most adults have been educated, and so it feels a little bit foreign. And the experiences of their children are a little bit different. So I don't know if that would be necessarily that it's harder in some ways, so much as it is. So much that it is a little bit of a different approach to education. And that difference probably feels like, well, things are being asked of my child that weren't asked of me, and therefore it must be harder, because we're always measuring, what, the experiences that our child has against the experience that we had. And so if we weren't asked to do certain things, or if we would find those things challenging, then we tend to think that those things would be, more rigorous, when we do have to ask ourselves, what maybe didn't we not get? How were we not given these kinds of opportunities that really aren't extraordinarily rigorous in some ways? That being said, I think that any student, every student probably faces times when they do find whatever the project or the assignment is challenging in some way, but that's an opportunity for growth. And so rigor is required, but it's that right balance of rest and rigor. It's that where can you find the tension between those two things, so that a student is being challenged, is growing, is being stretched in some way, but not being broken. So what's the right blend there? And I think the best schools of any kind are probably schools that strike that balance right, or, pretty well, more often than not. But yeah, there's no doubt about it that being asked to read, especially when you look across at different schools, when students aren't being asked to read, an entire work of literature. I think there was just was it an article in the Atlantic that was talking about, even for some of the Ivy League schools, where the students coming in, they've never read an entire piece of literature start to finish. They've read excerpts, they've read, essays, they've read summaries, they've had discussions, but some of that has been falling off across the country. And so even at some of these different Ivy League schools, they've been thinking, well, how do I tell a freshman, oh, now you have to read these 16 books? 16 may have been too much, but even getting the students to read 6, full length novels over the course of a semester, kids are like, holy Moses, what are we doing?
They're not used to it.
They're not used to it anymore. So, I think we have to look too and see that education over the decades it's been changing. And in some ways you have to get a little bit further away from it to then see, oh, wow, it's changed quite a bit,
So can you guys, can someone in any other state in the country use your curriculum? I guess that's kind of the question I'm asking.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So that's actually one of the really exciting things, is that classical education, the renewal of classical education, is happening countrywide. Different states have there are private schools everywhere in all 50 states. Whether or not there are sort of where parents have a lot of choice, that's dependent on sort of state by state decisions. There's more states, I want to say it's something in the high teens at this point, where states are giving more choice to families. Classic charter schools are becoming a thing these days as well. So Arizona and Texas and Louisiana and Florida and many other states as well are now starting to have classic charter schools. So those are technically public schools that have a classical orientation to them. So our textbooks are useful, with the exception of just a couple, are useful in both public and private schools. So our Bible curriculum would not be appropriate for a public school. Our Greek curriculum, which leans heavily into New Testament and translations and things, that would not be. But the vast majority of everything else that we produce would be available, could be used in both a sectarian and a non-sectarian school.
And Soleil, I hadn't heard that in a while. So that people could homeschool with this classical curriculum.
That's right. So Schole Academy is this, it's spelled Schole. It's a Greek word, and it means restful. It's actually the root word of where we get our word school. But most people would probably say these days that school is anything but restful. But it's that idea of providing opportunities, and this is where that word restful is sort of a gloss in some ways and not necessarily a specific translation. It's really trying to get back at this idea of a contemplative education, setting aside time for students to focus on the things that are most worthwhile. So giving them an opportunity to maybe go a little bit deeper instead of just as wide as possible. And our online K-12 school is the courses are sort of designed to give some of that depth and not just the breadth in all of the different subjects. That doesn't mean, though, that, pre-algebra students aren't finishing pre-algebra. Of course they are. But trying to make sure that we are moving students through with an opportunity to really savor what they're getting in their education and sort of plumb the depths of what they're getting in their education rather than just trying to throw as much at them as possible. We very often encourage, and our Schole Academy director, her name is Joelle Blake. She lives down in Dallas, Texas, but she's very good at trying to encourage our instructors to say, what's something that you can pull out of your curriculum so that you can give yourself more time to go give a richer, deeper experience than just a wider experience. Schole Academy operates a little bit more like an online co-op in some ways. We don't encourage families to come and try to take every course at Schole Academy. It's for families who are homeschooling. We want to encourage them to continue to homeschool in, embodied learning with their family or with their friends locally. But there might be some classes that they might think this would be a great one to kind of offload to somebody who's not just right here. So maybe it's a Latin class, maybe it's logic, maybe it's a math class. It helps families have resources beyond just sort of their regional barriers. But it is more like an online co-op in some ways.
Cool. Yeah. You got a lot going on.
Yeah. We didn't even talk about ClassicalU yet.
Yeah. Well, let's go there now. Okay. Tell us about ClassicalU.
So there's really three parts to Classical Academic Press. The first part is it as a publishing company. We produce curriculum for K-12 schools, and then some thought leadership monographs. Monographs are just a book usually written by a single author, and they're usually more for like an adult. You might pick up a monograph that's about, C.S. Lewis or Plato or something like that, but that's not necessarily a book that a student is going to read in a K-12 school. But we publish and we print things. And so those are the resources from the publishing company. And then there's Schole Academy that we just talked about, which is that online K-12 school or homeschool co-op. The third part of Classical Academic Press is something we call ClassicalU. It's a little bit of a play on words. It's you at the end of it, this idea of it being a place for adults to learn, but we also talk about it's a way for adults to become a more classical you. Get it? Y-O-U, you? Okay. Very clever indeed. But it's a teacher training platform. So I don't know if you've ever heard of like Masterclass. It's kind of like that, but for classical educators. So we have about 100 courses on ClassicalU, produced and hosted by a wide range of different thought leaders and teachers and instructors from across over the last, I want to say, 8 or so years, building up all of these classes, everything from what is classical education to what makes for a good teacher, and then even thinking about, mathematics or history or literature or science in particular, and kind of going into specific disciplines so that a classical homeschooler who's either a homeschooling mom or a teacher or a head of school could get a subscription and then kind of go through and take some courses to become a more classical educator themselves.
Is that why you primarily have a studio? I mean, is that where you're doing the filming and?
So we have a studio, but so it's for ClassicalU recordings. We bring folks in, they go through whatever the courses that they're going to teach, and those courses go up onto ClassicalU. So that's one use of the studio. We also create like training videos that go along with some of our curricula. So if you were thinking, I don't want my child to do Scole Academy for whatever reason, maybe it's a time zone issue or, whatever, but I still want my student to be able to do this particular Latin class. Well, you can buy the curriculum and then you can watch the videos of Karen Moore going through and teaching every single lesson directly to your child. So it's like a training just that accompanies the curriculum itself. And then we also use our studio for some marketing work and that kind of thing. So it's a well-used studio, and we've got some great people in there. But it's a little bit of a Swiss Army knife, depending on what we use it for.
You got a lot going. So somebody's keeping it all organized.
We try.
Yeah.
So you've articulated this a bit, I think, especially with 2020 and COVID, the education landscape shifts, right, that have started with that, but have really continued to happen, right? I actually grew up homeschooled through 8th grade.
Oh, great.
But when I was homeschooled, it was not that popular of a choice. It was not the way it is right now. I think I felt like I stood out a little more, like, oh, you're a weird homeschool. And today it's much more, at least in our area, lots of people, lots of families of all different kinds of backgrounds are choosing homeschooling.
Yeah.
And choosing classical homeschooling.
Yeah.
So what are sort of some of the trends you've seen that have, outside of COVID itself, that have brought classical education a little more forefront culturally? And maybe even what are some of the trends you see happening behind the scenes in kind of the classical academia and the teachers that are part of pushing that trend forward or supporting it kind of going in that direction? Because it seems like it's something that's becoming more talked about, more seen, known. People kind of are more aware.
Yeah. It does seem to be, I remember being at a dinner, this was several years ago. We were at a restaurant in South Carolina, I want to say, and the question went around the table as to, what do we think is coming for classical education? And the thought that I gave them was that I thought we were kind of, it was like we were a submarine underneath the ocean, in the water that a lot of people didn't know was there, but that we were, the times were changing a little bit, such that there were starting to be some initial articles and some things that were getting a little bit more well-known, where voices were starting to pop up every once in a while. But that I thought that, in the next 5, 6, 7 years, it was people were going to start noticing that we weren't going to be quite as undercover as we kind of had been. And that's happened that has happened. And in part, it's happened for a lot of reasons. COVID was one of those reasons. People were looking for a choice and they started investigating, and their classical education was. But there's been a lot of other changes too. One of them has been, the classic learning test. It's a test that kind of rivals the SAT and the ACT, started by some good friends of ours down in Annapolis, Maryland. They were kind of looking at this test and thinking that this test probably was, folks were kind of teaching to that test rather than identifying and trying to gauge how well educated is the child. And so Jeremy Tate and his team down there, they started working on this, a new test to rival and challenge the SAT. And it's really taken off. And it has gotten a lot of national attention.
What's it called?
The Classic Learning Test.
Classic Learning.
And colleges and universities are accepting it.
Wow.
Wheaton College, I think, was one of the first big colleges to accept it, but then a wide variety of other colleges and universities, and we're talking about hundreds probably at this point, are accepted in lieu of an SAT or an ACT test.
Had you heard of that before?
I've heard of it, but Covenant is not doing it yet. They're doing PSATs and SATs
are they still doing it?
But that's super interesting.
Yeah, talk to
to
them.
know that it's that big now. I forget where I first heard it, but yeah.
It's really, and they've got some other big plans too. So I'll leave that for them to talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, they've been doing some really great work in sort of elevating the profile of classic education through this test. That's been, like I said, a real rival to these two other kind of College Board kinds of exams. So, there's things like that are going on. Other things that have contributed, I think, we've probably seen the cultural and a cultural shift in the country where folks have been saying, wait a second, I'm thinking there might be something that I've been left behind. My voice isn't being heard, or this isn't exactly where I thought this was kind of headed. And folks trying to kind of recapture, reclaim some of even what we would think of as some of the good aspects of American culture. And so I don't want to go like too political, but I think that there has been sort of a parallel in some ways with not necessarily a particular political agenda, but with people just in general saying, I'd like to reconsider some of the choices that have been made, and then thinking about, well, what's been missing? Where would be areas that I'd like to reconsider for my child? So I think parents have been starting to make some individual choices for their kids and thinking, where is my child getting formed? And one of the places that children are formed the most is at school. So just looking at that and thinking that there might be opportunities to make some changes. Homeschooling has been growing across all different demographics, not just conservative. Some that it's Republicans, it's Democrats, it's everybody across the board have been thinking about other options for their children. And classical ed is just one of the options that people find when they go looking, and we hope that it's one that feels very welcoming to people of all different backgrounds and ethnic groups and so forth, because it really is something that we think is this kind of liberal arts education is a rich inheritance for everyone, not for any particular kind of person.
Right. So is it in other languages? Have you started that?
Yes, actually. This year has actually been 2025 there were a lot of international trips. Chris was in Hong Kong. He was in Ecuador. I've been to Australia. We were both in England. He was in Brazil. There's a variety of schools in different African countries as well that are popping up as well. So classical education, the renewal of classical education is really becoming more of a global change. Now there are a couple of countries that I just listed off that don't require major translations. Australia and England, obviously, they would love it if we would put the U back into certain words. But other than that, they can kind of get by with what we've got. But, when we think about different, whether it's Colombia or Ecuador, those are, and in Mexico, there's going to be a conference in Mexico next year. So Spanish-speaking countries are looking for opportunities with classical education. Brazil would be Portuguese, obviously. The Art of Argument has already been translated into Korean. I don't know why they picked the Art of Argument first. Maybe they thought that would be teaching students how to argue well would be a great idea. And then different Chinese translations and so forth. So there is more of a need for translations internationally. Trying to figure out exactly how to do that and do that well is something that we've been spending a lot of time on this year. Everything from licensing agreements to translating rights to like printers in different countries, international shipping.
So it's a lot.
And
currency.
Yeah. What does international business look like? What are the legal implications of different things? Who are the right partners in these different countries? Wow. It's quite a bit to try to navigate.
Importing and exporting.
But
it'll be a whole new team, whole new division.
It could be.
AI, I bet, will be helpful to you guys in the future with that.
It could be.
I would think.
Though and that is another new frontier. How does, artificial intelligence play into all of this?
Right.
For our internal work, artificial intelligence does have some benefit to us, but there are some other things where, I don't know if we would want to say, like, have AI write our international business agreements for us. I'd be a little nervous about it.
Yep.
It's, you've probably heard it said that AI isn't coming for your job, but it's not going to be, how do they say it? It's not that AI is going to replace you, but the person who uses AI will be the person who replaces you. Right?
Yep. Yeah.
We've probably hit the ceiling on my ability to talk intelligently about where AI is going. It changes every 5 minutes. But
it does.
Yeah.
I don't want to act like I know more than I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a moving landscape.
It is.
phase. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to pin down where it's going and what's happening. Yeah. Well, I can't believe it. I looked at the clock and it's been 45 minutes already.
This has flown by.
But yeah, felt like it's even close to that. So we should probably move to some wrap-up questions here. Do you have any last thoughts on if someone is just starting out kind of in homeschooling or sending their kids to classical school or looking to become a classical teacher or just kind of moving towards learning about this? Where could someone start?
Oh, that's a good
And kind of where would you direct them? What would you say to them? How would you help them take the first step of this journey?
Well, there's so many great resources that are out there. And, when I think back to, 1999, there weren't nearly as many resources, but now there's it's rich. So there's a bunch of different organizations that somebody could get involved with. So I'll start with the Society for Classical Learning is another organization that we partner with. That would be a place where somebody could go, and they have conferences every year. They have all sorts of great resources on their website to learn a little bit more about what does it mean to be classical educator. They set up trainings and workshops and all sorts of things. They work very closely with schools and heads of school. There's an organization called Classical Commons that's out there that's kind of just getting started. So where they try to match educators with schools that have openings. So it's a little bit of I'm trying to think what the right kind
like
of
a recruiter almost.
Yeah, in some ways.
Yeah.
So they do some great work to try to help do some of that matching. So if you kind of know that you want to get into classical education, there's a bunch of different organizations out there that could be help in shaping that. And then there's classical schools everywhere, and there are co-ops everywhere. Now for that as well. If I was going to talk about resources that we have, ClassicalU would be a great place to start, getting a subscription to that and just kind of going through some of those classes to learn a little bit more about how to become a more classically minded person or a classical educator, both for homeschooling and for teaching. That's a great resource. And then, if you're just trying to get started with teaching your kids, then, obviously we have the curriculum and those kinds of things to do that, and Scholey Academy, which could also be a help, but just starting to do a little bit of research. And, I could name even publishers that are competitors with us that also do some really great work as well. We point people to some of our competitors some of the time just because they do, we do things a little bit differently than they do. Sometimes parents are looking for them and not for us. Anyway.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on, Jolie. I have a closing question. We ask this question to everyone. I'm curious what your answer will be. So if you were to go back and start your career over again,
sure,
but keep all the knowledge and experiences that you've gotten to have over the years, is there anything that you would do differently and why?
I was thinking about this question and I was trying to think of a really great way to answer. The times and places that I might go back and change them, it's not any one particular thing, but it's probably the lens through which I look at things. And I know this it could sound a little bit like a Sunday school answer, and I don't mean for it to, but there's a Philippians 2:3-5. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. The times in my life where if I could go back and do something different again, it's because I didn't keep that as my kind of orienting view and focus and goal. Because it's rarely always necessarily about just not doing something, but it's about doing something differently in a different way and with a different focus and, like I said, different orientation. And there would certainly be things that I would do differently as well. But if I had kept that framework in mind, I probably would have made a bunch of different decisions differently. That would be, I don't know if I would name, the list would be too long of things I'd go back and actually do differently, but that would be the orientation.
But it's good to just keep bringing yourself back to that scripture.
Yeah.
As a reminder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The maturity of time has a way of shifting that particular thing, right? The lens, even if you couldn't change the action, but you could just change your own internal, right? Yeah, I can resonate with that for sure.
I think there's without that, I'll speak just for myself. Probably selfishness, would have been a guide rather than looking at things differently and keeping others, their needs, what is good, what is true, what is beautiful in front of me, rather than what, maybe focusing on myself, more than I should have. And that is sort of the root of, all sorts of bad decisions. So, just wishing that I had probably kept that as my focus. Would have probably
more people, we
things.
could all follow that, because that's just what you see in society, right? Everybody's looking out just for themselves and not others. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. This was fascinating.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jolie. Appreciate your time, and you shared so many details. I felt I was very in it with you. So yeah, thank you for your articulation of so many things.
You guys are doing some really great things here, and I really appreciate being invited. Thank you. This was easier than I thought it would be.
It's good. That's the goal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. That's it for today's conversation with Jolie from Classical Academic Press. I hope you felt as inspired listening as we felt talking to her. You'll find all the links to connect with Jolie and with us here at SBN Lattice in the show notes. Thanks for hanging out with us on Beyond the Deal. Until next time, keep going, keep growing, and keep building your story.